Welcome to Read by the Author. This is season 3, the first episode, and this season we are reading Time Anomaly, which is the second book in the ECHO Trilogy. So we're just continuing on through the series because we did Echo in Time for season 1, and we did Resonance, the first novella, for season 2. If you're just coming to the show now, I would recommend going back to season 1 because the ECHO Trilogy is the type of series that is very much a serial, like each book builds on the last. It's all the same characters. You're going to be super lost if you just start right here. That is the intro for Time Anomaly, and let's get into the story. Prologue. The Delta, Egypt, circa 3500 BCE. "Quiet, girl," Ep1 said. Sick of the young Negeret's whimpers, he lashed out with his arm, backhanding her across the face. She fell on the cavern floor in a heap of shapely limbs and bruised flesh. He grinned. The young Negeret was pretty enough now in her pre-manifestation state, but he saw the potential for true beauty hidden beneath her thinning mask of humanity. There was just enough time left before she manifested completely. Just enough time for her to conceive and bear his child and pass on her beauty to the first ever offspring of a union between two Negerets. Just enough time. Ep1 sneered. She would make a decent enough mother to his new host body, but he cared less about how attractive that body might be and more about the power it was certain to contain. Finally, he would take one giant step closer to defeating Ra, to being in control, to unmaking everything. "Please," the young Negeret whispered. "No more." She pulled her legs up in front of her, hugging them to her chest in a pathetic attempt to hide herself from him. It was useless. He'd already seen all of her. He'd already done what needed to be done. If she wasn't with child by now, it would be too late. He would have to dispose of her, as he had done with his other failed attempts, and start over. "Your depths of depravity never cease to amaze me," a woman said from behind Ep1, her voice oddly accented and laced with scorn. He spun around, pulling an obsidian dagger from his woven leather belt. The intruder, a striking Negeret, stood in the mouth of the cavern. Behind her, the sky shone with silvery starlight, but not even the heavens could compete with her eyes. They were aglow with fire, with power. He could feel it writhing beneath her skin, seeking a way to expand out into the physical plane. He needed that power. Ep1 licked his lips, overtaken by an uncontrollable hunger, and took a step toward the stranger. "Who are you?" he hissed. He would rip her apart. He would consume her, possess her. He would have her power. The Negeret sneered. "You are pathetic, Ep1." Ep1 stumbled. He wasn't pathetic. He glanced at his pre-manifestation Negeret, sniveling against the cavern wall. She was pathetic, not him. Who was this woman, this imposter, to call him, a Netjer, one of the original universal powers, pathetic? He would eviscerate her. With a bark of laughter, the Negeret raised her hand, and a tangle of vines made of nothing of this world burst up from the cavern floor and snaked around Ep1's legs, restraining him. "You disgust me. If I could erase you from existence..." His lips retracted, and a vicious snarl clawed its way up his throat. "But you are needed in the future." She crossed her arms over her chest. "So all I can do is take young Aset away from you and erase all of your memories of her and what you have done to her, and all memory of me, of course." The Negeret scanned him from head to toe. "And your host body's memories as well, since he invited you to possess him in the first place." She smiled, but there was only vengeance in her eyes. "And I think I shall leave you trapped in that body for a little while longer." The otherworldly vines climbed higher, capturing Ep1's arms and trapping them against his body. He struggled against them, but they only constricted, securing their hold on him. The Nezarette took several steps, closing the distance between them. She raised her hand and touched her fingertips to Ep1's forehead. Her eyes narrowed. It's a fitting punishment that your freedom will mean his death, but it's not enough. I think I shall add some memories of intense pain as well. She sighed. Though I fear that, too, will not be enough. Nothing will change what must come. Ep1 felt the barely contained power within the Nezarette swell, and a searing pain slithered into his head. For a while, minutes, hours, days, or possibly years, all he knew was pain. Part 1. Cairo, Egypt, present day. Know this, Heru. However much time stands between us, however much distance separates us, I will find my way back to you. I will return to you. Taken from the Hall of Lex, Nezarette Oasis, Old Kingdom, circa 2180 BCE. 1. Sex and Death. I swear to some god who isn't you, Marcus, I said, closing my eyes and relaxing into our suite's massive jacuzzi tub. If you don't get that cute butt of yours in here right now... You'll do what, little Ivanov? Marcus said from the doorway, his low, silken voice and enticing accent heightening my anticipation. Keeping my eyes closed, I let the corners of my lips curve upward. The things that man can do to me with only his voice. I shook my head ever so slowly and slouched a little lower in the oval tub, the almost too hot water scented with the tiniest drop of vanilla essential oil. Over the past week, this tub had become one of my favorite things about our rooms in the council's Cairo palace. The Florence Palazzo had been stunning, but its accommodations were definitely cramped by modern standards. Thankfully, the Cairo palace, though nearly as old as the Palazzo, didn't suffer from the same historical handicap. I had only just left Marcus's side to sink into the water, but even a minute away from the man I was quite literally addicted to, whose bonding pheromones were as vital to my survival as oxygen, was a minute too long. Our bond was both emotional and physiological, and it was both the most wondrous and the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. Marcus's shoes squeaked faintly on the polished marble floor as he entered the palatial bathroom, which meant he was still wearing shoes, which meant he was still fully dressed. Damn. I sighed and opened my eyes just as he stopped at the foot of the tub. He was staring down at me, his golden irises burning with desire. But he wasn't showing any intention of shedding his gray slacks or pristine white button-down shirt, of revealing the sculpted masculine body the clothing tried and failed miserably to conceal. You're not actually going to join me, are you? I stuck out my lower lip, just a bit. One side of Marcus's mouth quirked, and he narrowed his eyes. That depends. On? He inhaled deeply and glanced up at the ceiling. On what you'll do to me if I don't join you. His eyes settled on me. I shifted my legs, teasing him with a different view. I honestly think you should be more concerned about what I won't do to you. Something dark glinted in Marcus's eyes, far different from the playful predatory intensity that had shone in them only a moment ago, and an unexpected burst of anxiety twisted in my gut. I shifted in the tub, closing my legs and sitting up a little higher. And again, Marcus's eyes glinted with darkness. You really are a little whore, aren't you? I stiffened and my blood ran cold. Despite all the reserved, almost stony characteristics several millennia had chiseled into Marcus's personality, he was never cruel to me. A little frightening, perhaps, and sometimes frustratingly tight-lipped and other times shockingly blunt, but never cruel. My anxiety expanded, snaking out to my limbs and electrifying my muscles. As Marcus stalked around the edge of the oversized tub, an inexplicable instinct screamed inside my head. Danger! Get away! Flee! Marcus knelt beside the tub, a cool smile doing little to soften his hardened, achingly handsome features. I caught another glimpse of darkness in his eyes. It slid around, lurking just beneath the surface of his black-rimmed golden irises in a hauntingly familiar way, like a ghostly parasite. I had seen something similar far too often during the months I had spent trapped in the Ott, the otherworldly plane where time and space mingled fluidly, as Set's, my father's, prisoner. That same darkness had filled his eyes, too. At the time, I had thought it was Set's sanity sliding in and out of place. My stomach twisted, making me instantly nauseated. Marcus and Set now shared half of Nguyen's power. Was it possible that sharing that power had somehow allowed the darkness, Set's madness, to infect Marcus? Because this was most certainly not normal Marcus behavior. The chill in my blood seeped into my bones, despite the hot water lapping against my skin. Marcus? Are you feeling okay? What? Tutting me, Marcus reached out and caressed the side of my face with the backs of his curled fingers. There was no comfort in the touch, no sensuality, and there was none of the electric pleasure that resulted from our bonding. It was almost like the man kneeling beside the tub wasn't Marcus. Not really. It didn't make any sense, and at the same time, it made me want to scream and cry and run away. Bile rising, I fought the urge to panic. Whatever warnings my subconscious was shrieking in the back of my mind, this was Marcus, after all. He wouldn't hurt me. He loved me. It took a colossal effort not to flinch away from his touch, not to hide behind closed eyes, not to shiver, not to scream. I stared at him, my neck stiff and my eyes wide. "The power is beginning to show in your eyes," he said, and I started to tremble. His accent had changed. He now sounded very aristocratic and very British. He didn't sound like Marcus at all. "Poor Alexandra. You cannot hold it forever. In time, it will erode your body until your bones are little more than dust." My breaths came faster, and I gripped my thighs so hard that my nails cut into my flesh. "How? What are you talking about? Marcus, are you?" "Oh." Marcus pulled his hand back and raised his dark eyebrows. "The love of your puny life is here, of course, and he's not too happy." His lips spread into a razor-sharp grin. "But he's not in control right now." I shook my head. He sounded like Set, exactly like Set. It was impossible. Then again, a lot of impossible things had been happening lately. Clearing my throat, I whispered, "Who are you? Set?" The man who both was and wasn't Marcus flashed me a brilliant smile. "Not quite, Alexandra, though as far as you're concerned, yes." My heart hammered against my breastbone. "What? How are you?" He waved his hand dismissively. "Insignificant." I had to swallow several times before I could find my voice and ask the only thing that really mattered at this moment. "What do you want?" "Isn't it obvious?" This time only one eyebrow rose. "I'm here to reclaim the power you've stolen from me." "I didn't steal it. Nguyen gave it to me," I said, somehow managing to keep my voice even. I had absolutely no idea what was going on, but I really didn't think antagonizing this not quite Set being who was somehow possessing Marcus would go over well. "It matters not." 1 second, his hand was on the edge of the tub. The next, it was encircling my neck. He moved faster than I had ever seen Marcus move, and I had seen him move inhumanly fast on multiple occasions. This was something else. My heart rate quadrupled, but shock held me frozen in place. I felt as fragile as a porcelain doll. His eyes scanned my body through the water. "Such a pretty, delicate little toy. I'd hate to break you before I've even had a chance to play." He paused, letting his words sink in, and met my eyes. The tainted darkness had completely overtaken the gold in Marcus's irises. "If the bond still functioned while I was present, there'd be a way I could let you live. and the method of extracting the power from you would be immensely pleasurable for us both." He frowned, then raised one shoulder in a half-hearted shrug. "But it is clear to me now that such a thing is impossible. Pity." I shook my head. "Please, don't." Clenching his jaw, he took a deep breath through his nose and tightened his grip on my throat. Before I could react, he shoved my head under the surface of the water. I fought his hold, kicking and scratching at anything I could reach. The top of my foot made contact with the faucet, and I cried out underwater, inhaling sharply. As bathwater filled my lungs, I coughed and sputtered, but it did no good. Set Marcus was drowning me. And because of our bond, if I drowned, whatever was possessing Marcus would effectively kill us both. I had watched Marcus die in an alternate timeline nobody but me remembered. I refused to let him die again. Instinctively, I stilled, and Nguyen's power exploded from my every cell, surrounding me, transforming me. The world fell away, leaving only a sense of warmth and comfort and eternal well-being. Gone was my warm bathwater. Gone was Marcus's death grip on my neck. Gone was the impending threat of death. 2. Present and Past. With a flash of smoky colors, the world reappeared, dark and drafty. I fell to my hands and knees on a floor that was both cold and hard, coughing up water on polished black and white marble tiles. I hacked, gagged, and retched until my throat felt raw, inside and out, like I had been drowning in flames rather than bathwater. Flames seemed appropriate. I had been drowning in my own personal hell. Marcus almost killed me. Closing my eyes, I rested my forehead on a dry patch of floor and worked on catching my breath, uncaring that I was naked and had no clue where I had landed in my panicked flight. Wherever I was, it couldn't be far from Marcus's and my suite. In all of my accidental spatial shifts, I had never moved more than several hundred feet from my starting point, which meant I had to catch my breath, and fast, because I needed to get as far away from the man I loved as possible, before he tried to kill me again. Dread wrapped around my heart and lungs as a terrifying thought eroded my resolve to flee. If I was out of his reach, what would he do to the people I had left behind in the palace? To Jenny, my human sister, who just a week ago had learned she was pregnant with Set's baby? Or to Kat, my half-sister, who had only just started to manifest as a result of being forced in a last-ditch effort to rescue me from Set's Ott prison? Or to Dominic, my half-brother and closest friend? Or to Marcus? What would that thing inside of Marcus do to him? My efforts to catch my breath turned into frantic gasping, and glittering spots floated in front of my vision. I couldn't catch my breath. There wasn't enough oxygen in the air. I could barely breathe. "Lex!" a woman shouted. Her heels clicked hard and fast on the marble tiles. "Lex, are you okay?" There was something familiar about her voice, about the hint of an accent, but I couldn't quite place her. I should have looked up, stood, tried to cover myself, done something. But with the tremors coursing through my body and my lungs' desperate attempt to suck all the oxygen from the room, I couldn't manage to do anything besides stare at the floor and take gulping breaths. "Pick her up! We have to get her out of here before that guard regains consciousness, and before Apep realizes she's with you, and—" "I know." The second voice was male and also sounded familiar, but like the woman's, I couldn't place it. "Give me your coat." Seconds later, I felt rough fabric being draped over my shoulders and my limbs being manhandled as a trench coat was situated on my body. Before I knew what was happening, I was rolled onto my back and lifted off the ground, strong arms supporting me under my knees and behind my shoulders. I probably should have struggled, but I was half delirious and on the verge of passing out. And the strong, warm arms wrapped around me hardly seemed threatening. The stranger's hold on me shifted, and he held me closer against his chest. "It's going to be all right, Alexandra. I swear I won't let—" "Don't make promises you can't keep," the woman said. "Lex deserves better than lies, especially from you." The man grunted, and I could feel the vibration against my cheek.
"A pep possessed me," he said. "I did not choose this."
For the first time, I noticed the man's accent. It was similar to Marcus's, with its ancient Middle Eastern notes, but quite a bit thicker.
"I have been present during every disturbing moment that a pep is in control of my body. Always aware, never able to act. Thinking of how I may one day make amends for all he has done is all that keeps me from ending up as insane as a pep."
The woman cleared her throat. "I apologize. That was unfair of me. It is just hard to forget some of the things he has done."
"I understand."
I pulled my head away from the man's shoulder and squinted up at his face, and stiffened. Even in the dim light of what I now realized was the palace's grand staircase, his pale, severe Nezarite features were easily recognizable. I could never mistake that face. "Set." My muscles tensed and I twisted in his arms, intending to do whatever possible to break free from his hold. But Set had apparently been expecting a struggle, and he tightened his grip on my body.
"Lex, stop it,"
the woman said in a screeching whisper.
"You must stop. We're trying to help you."
A very unexpected face appeared inches from mine, and I froze. My back arched and one foot pushed on the cool marble banister. Author's note. I don't know why, but I remember when I was writing this, I don't remember exactly what I was doing when I was writing this, but I remember that position of Set carrying Lex and Dr. Issa being right there, and they're on the stairs, and she's pushing on the railing of the banister. I guess, are they not on maybe they're not on the stairs yet. Anyway, but her, Set holding her, a Set being there, and her pushing while he's cradling her, and her pushing with her foot on the banister and arching her body has always been a crystal clear picture in my mind. Just random note.
Dr. Issa?
I had met her only once in a hospital back in Seattle after I had awakened from a coma resulting from a near date rape. She had said things, known things about what I really was, and then she disappeared.
Yes, it's me," she said, patting my shoulder. "Long story very short, this Set, who is essentially a completely different man from the one who's been tormenting you most of your life, is your true father."
She frowned, then bit her lip.
"But he's been possessed by a very evil being who just happens to be the same being who slipped into Heru this evening, and if you remain here much longer, he will kill you, and then he will destroy everyone you love." She scanned me and once again frowned. "You didn't tell me you would be naked," she tisked. "You should remember to do that."
What? Nothing she had said made any sense to my stunned brain. If not for her knowing about Marcus's so-called possession, I would have been screaming my head off. Instead, I was working on not hyperventilating. Again. Sighing, Dr. Issa shook her head and continued down the pale, elaborately carved marble staircase.
"Never mind. We don't have time now. I'll explain what I can on the road, and you should slow down your breathing or you'll pass out."
She glanced down at her wrist, then shifted her attention higher, focusing on Set.
"Pick up the pace, according to what Nick saw in the art. We've got less than 3 minutes before a pep returns."
Set started moving at a quick jog, and I wriggled in the cradle of his arms. "I can walk! Put me down!" I said between heaving breaths. Whatever Dr. Issa claimed, I definitely wasn't comfortable with Set carrying me.
"No."
Set managed to lace the single syllable with so much heavy emotion that I stilled.
"You can barely breathe as it is. And beyond that, this may be the last chance I ever have to hold my little girl."
I didn't bother pointing out that I was a full-grown woman, likely because I really was having a hard time breathing. I stared up at Set's face, and with each consecutive glance he flicked down at me, some of my more tightly wound bundles of hatred and disgust loosened. There was just so much concern, so much warmth in the depths of his rich brown eyes, Brown, not black, like the eyes of the Set I knew. Where are we going? I finally managed to ask as we reached the bottom of the stairwell. Set glanced down at me again, his eyes lingering on my neck, where I assumed some pretty nasty bruises were taking shape. It didn't really matter. Thanks to my Nezarette regenerative abilities, they'd be gone soon enough. To safety, he said. Come, Dr. Isa whispered. Hurry. She held open a gracefully carved door and ushered us into a dim hallway. It was one of the many parts of the palace I had yet to explore. We quickly made our way down a set of stairs, along another hallway, and through an exterior door, me in Set's arms and Dr. Isa hustling along beside us. When we reached a squat black car parked crookedly on the side of the street nearest the almost hidden door we had exited through, Set hugged me closer to him. I tensed immediately. I am so sorry for everything, Alexandra. He set me in the front passenger seat. And I'm so proud of you, of everything you have already done, and of everything you are about to do. He leaned in closer and pressed his lips against my cheek, stunning me speechless, then straightened and shut the door. I was absolutely and completely baffled, not to mention totally freaked out. Set kissed my cheek. He helped me. And Marcus, who wasn't Marcus, had tried to kill me. It was like I had slipped into a mirrored version of the world where everything was reversed. Up was down, good was evil, sane was not. Seconds later, Dr. Isa slid into the driver's seat and stuck the key into the ignition. She guided the little car out onto the street, glanced at me sidelong, catching my eye, and returned her focus to the way ahead. I took a shaky breath, appreciative that my urge to hyperventilate had passed now that Set was no longer close by. What's going on? Is Marcus okay? Is this... Oh God, is whatever's wrong with him, this possession thing, permanent?
No, Lex, it's not. It is not, Dr. Isa said. If all goes as planned, he will be fine.
As planned? What plan? And what kind of a being can possess people? I had experienced a lot over the past 7 months, and my eyes had been opened to an entirely new, unbelievable world of mythical, practically magical beings who could step out of time to observe the past, present, and possible futures. But I had never heard anything about possession.
I can't tell you much. To do so would invalidate the timeline, but...
She paused, shifting in her seat to pull something out of the pocket of her pale linen pants.
This will hopefully help to convince you to believe what I can tell you.
She handed me an antiquated, almost disintegrating, folded-up piece of paper and reached overhead to turn on the dome light.
Careful with that, it's ancient.
I did my best to contain the overwhelming need my body still felt to shiver and unfolded the piece of paper. I sucked in a surprised breath. The paper was, in fact, not paper. It was pressed papyrus and, from what I could see of both the craftsmanship and level of deterioration, thousands of years old. The age, however, wasn't the most surprising thing about it. The language and handwriting were. The former was English, and the latter was, well, mine. Swallowing in an attempt to wet my suddenly parched throat, I shook my head. That's my handwriting.
It is.
This isn't possible.
Read it,
Dr. Isa said. So I did. Lex. First off, Marcus will be fine. Well, not fine, exactly. He'll be really upset about what Ep1 almost made him do, but he'll be okay, really. Jenny, Kat, Dom, Alexander, they all will. I know you're confused, but it will all make sense soon, or at least most of it will. Okay, some of it will. So here's the deal. When Marcus tried to drown you, me, us, he wasn't actually Marcus, which is the reason you can't stay in our native timeline, your time. You have to go back to Nguyen's time to learn how to use your borrowed power. It's the only way you and Marcus and everyone else will ever be safe. If you don't do this, everything and everyone we love will be destroyed. But if you do, we'll have a real fighting chance. I promise you it's the only way. Okay, I have thought long and hard about how to convince you, my former self, that what I'm telling you is actually coming from me, your future self, in the past. It's confusing, I know. Anyway, this is what I've come up with. The thing that only we know. Marcus died. We changed the timeline. We fixed it. But for a few horrible seconds, he was really, truly dead. Oh my God. Nobody else knew about that road untaken timeline because I had reversed time and set our paths on a different course, one where Marcus was still alive. This ancient note really was from me. It was the second piece of evidence I had come across in the past 2 weeks that suggested that I would eventually tap into the time travel aspect of Nguyen's power. The other being a Renaissance sculpture that Marcus had commissioned Michelangelo to create in my likeness some 500 years ago. I had been skeptical when there had been only one piece of evidence, but now, with this note added to the mix, I could no longer deny the truth. I would access more of the alien power flowing through my veins, entwining with my ba, my soul, and I would travel back in time. It was impossible, and apparently inevitable. Pressing my lips together, I continued reading. Now listen, you have to trust Dr. Issa. Do everything she says, and I mean every single thing. Go ahead and ask questions, but don't expect too many answers. She holds back things from me too. Things that must be from my future, but her past. So don't get too frustrated with her. It won't do you any good anyway. Trust me, I know. Just do what she says and try to keep calm and break a leg and use the force and all that. And try to enjoy at least some of it. I'd wish you luck, but I don't think you'll need it. Lex. I cleared my throat and gently set the ancient piece of papyrus on my lap. How? With a dry laugh, I shook my head. Where did you get this? From you. I know, but a little over 4,000 years ago. Mouth hanging open, I stared at her, waiting for some sort of an explanation. But, I shook my head. My brain seemed to have transformed into something akin to gelatin, incapable of processing complex thoughts. 4,000 years ago? Marcus will be fine, Lex. When I didn't respond, Dr. Issa added, when you return, and you will return, you will find him healthy and whole. This I swear. I blinked several times, then inhaled deeply and turned to look out the window. I didn't understand. This, Marcus set the ancient letter from myself, all seemed so impossible, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fit the puzzle pieces together. I couldn't make sense of any of it. I wouldn't fight it, not when my own words claimed that this path was the only one that would keep the people I loved safe, but accepting that didn't make the whole situation any less convoluted or any more fathomable. As Dr. Issa drove south along the Nile's east bank, I stared out at the river and attempted to reorganize my chaotic thoughts into something that resembled coherency, or at least logic. The lights of Cairo glowed on the water's surface, creating an ethereal reflection of the city. It was normal, logical, expected, unlike the tornado that had ripped through my orderly, if slightly fantastical life. After a few minutes, I asked a question that seemed relatively easy, one that couldn't possibly be answered with another impossibility. Where are we going? Memphis. Memphis was the ancient capital of the northern half of Egypt, what had come to be known as Lower Egypt due to the north-flowing Nile. Considering that the ancient city of Memphis didn't exist anymore, Dr. Issa had given me a region, not a specific location. Care to elaborate? I said. You'll see soon enough. Okay. I shifted my attention from the midnight view of the Nile to the woman who seemed to be part rescuer, part abductor. Can you at least explain what's going on with Marcus and Set and this whole possession thing? I shook my head, my heart clenching. I mean, last I checked, Set was the one hell-bent on ruining my life, and Marcus was the one equally determined to protect me. As the reality of what had happened sank in, that Marcus's hands had almost ended my life, hysteria bubbled out of my throat in the form of a shrill laugh. It quickly turned into something that sounded and felt a lot more like muffled sobs. Marcus being healthy and whole was one thing, but he would hate himself for what he had almost done to me. He would obsess about it, punish himself for it. I wrapped my arms around my middle, attempting to hold my disintegrating composure together. I ached to comfort him. Dr. Isa reached over and gave my arm a gentle squeeze. "It wasn't Heru who tried to kill you, Lex. Not technically." That's what he said. As my sluggish, oxygen-deprived mind finally registered the name she had been using to refer to the man I knew as Marcus, I narrowed my eyes, scrutinizing her delicate, feminine features. "You're Nezarette." The last time I had seen her, more than half a year ago, I hadn't even known I was Nezarette. I'd had no way of recognizing her as such. "I am," she said. "You could have told me back in the hospital. It would have saved me a lot of trouble. And saved me from thinking I was losing my mind. You know I couldn't have done that. I was already teetering on breaking Nguyen's rules by telling you what little I did." She shrugged. "But it had to be done." "Why?" "To preserve the timeline, to get us here, to set you on your current path." "Which is leading me to where, exactly?" She smiled, and the warmth contained within the expression muffled some of my unease. "I already told you, Memphis." Before I could respond, she added, "But you really should be more concerned with when." I took a deep breath, exhaling a heavy sigh. "Fine, I'll bite. My current path is leading me to when?" "Approximately 2180 BCE. My mouth dropped open, and for a few minutes all I could do was gape at her. Remotely, I registered that we had driven onto a bridge and were crossing to the west bank of the Nile, but really, the direction our car was traveling was small potatoes compared to the doctor's proclamation that I would be heading back a good 4,000 years, which I realized somewhere in the very back of my mind had to be when I had given her the note. "You will learn much," she added, like that explained everything. Or anything. "Okay." I frowned, my mind racing. "So I'm supposed to somehow find my way back to the end of the 6th dynasty?" I paused. Even if I could somehow manage that, I'd be popping in at a really volatile time. That was the end of the Old Kingdom. I'm pretty sure an ancient civil war isn't really the safest place for me right now. Dr. Isa chuckled. "You have no idea." "But you were attacked tonight by what is essentially a spirit," she shrugged. "Nguyen will explain it better, I'm sure. But anyway, this spirit just happens to be the same thing that's been possessing Set for over 4,000 years, turning him into, well, an evil bastard." "Wait, what?" "Its name is Apep, and it is the original owner of the power now split between Marcus and Set. For some reason that I don't fully understand, sharing part of that power opens Marcus up to being overtaken by Apep for short periods of time." I mulled her words over. Apep was one of the ancient names for Apophis, the ancient Egyptian god of chaos and darkness, commonly associated with a serpent. Was his possession of Set the reason that, over time, the mythological Set had become associated with chaos as well? I breathed in through my nose, then exhaled slowly. "So, while this Apep thing was possessing Marcus, I take it that Set was free to, well, be Set? The old Set?" Dr. Isa nodded, a tiny sad smile curving her lips. "He was, though Apep has undoubtedly returned to him by now. That vile creature has had more than 4 millennia to gain an unrelenting foothold in Set's body. It would seem that even with the inroad he now has into your Marcus, Set is the more comfortable fit, like a favorite pair of boots." She wrinkled her nose. I was getting the impression that she hated Ep1 just as much as I did. My eyebrows drew together. So Set, my father, isn't actually evil? Dr. Isa glanced at me. That is correct, Lex. He's not evil. Unexpectedly, a tension I had been carrying ever since learning that the Nezaret's most loathed and most hunted villain was my father lessened. It felt like a corrosive iron wire had been wound too tightly around my heart, but had suddenly disintegrated. Set was my biological father, but it was Ep1 who had been tormenting me all these years. It was Ep1 who had deceived, kidnapped, and impregnated my sister, abducted and tortured me, killed Marcus, and intended to take over the world with Nguyen's power. Ep1 was the evil one, not Set. I laughed, and this time there wasn't a single trace of hysteria in the sound. That's just... wow. I shook my head. That's fantastic. For you, maybe. Less so for Set, I think. My laughter died as I considered Dr. Isa's meaning. Oh God. I couldn't imagine the sheer avalanche of horror and despair Set must have felt over the long stretch of time he had spent as prisoner in his own body, what he must have watched his own hands do, the orders he must have heard given in his own voice, the lives he must have felt himself extinguish. He'd had a front row seat to all that destruction, all that terror, and he'd been incapable of doing anything to stop it. How is he still sane? I glanced at Dr. Isa in time to see a single tear roll down her cheek. She wiped it away with a quick swipe of her hand and swallowed loudly. I'm not so sure that he is. I'm sorry. Did you know him? Before? No more, Dr. Isa said. She shot me the briefest of glances. I've already told you all I can. Revealing too much could alter the timeline irreparably, and that is something none of us can afford. Thank you so much for listening. This is the end of episode 1 of season 3 of the Read by the Author podcast, and I will be back next week to continue Time Anomaly with chapter 3. So yeah, thanks for listening. Have a great week.